Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to make a ring band out of sheet copper. Last time I showed you how to make a wire ring, and this time we're going to do the banded ring, and this is going to be adjustable. I'm going to use my tin snips and a ruler to measure for a medium-sized ring, which is about size 6 to 8. So I'm going to measure about 2 1/8 inch length, and I'm going to make it about 1/4 inch wide. You can adjust your measurements to whatever size you need, and I think that the 1/4 inch is a pretty nice width for a ring. So I'm going to hold my ruler up, and the first thing I'm going to do is measure my length. So again, I said a size medium, about a 6 to 8, which is about 2 1/8 inch in length. Now, if you want to make a small ring, like a size 4 to 6, you would make about a 2 inch length of ring. Or if you wanted to make a larger size ring, say a size 8 to 10, that would be about 2 1/4 inches in length. And then on the bottom of my corner of my piece of copper, I'm going to mark in about 1/4 inch, and that again is going to be the width of my band of the ring. And I'm going to use my tin snips, and I'm going to simply cut that out. Now, if you're using a gauge of copper that's heavier, you can also use a jewelry saw to cut it out. That's simple to do, but with this I'm just using my tin snips. It's very easy. We want to always try to make it as easy as we can, right? So I'm going to snip that out, take a look at it, make sure it's even. I think I did a pretty good job with this one. And because we're going to be soldering this metal, we want to make sure it's really clean, and you can see that this one is aged, it has dirt on it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to clean it up with some steel wool, and make sure you put a piece of newsprint down or a paper towel, because steel wool makes a mess. And you can't solder without having clean metal. You're going to have a difficult time getting the solder to stick. You will have much better results if you have nice, clean, shiny metal. So that's the first, one of the first things you want to do for soldering is make sure that your metals are very clean, and we're removing oxidation. And when we use flux, you can't solder without flux. And when we use flux is what joins our solder to our metal, and it actually removes the oxidation. That's like the job of flux, and that's what allows the solder to adhere to the metal. But the metal has to be clean. We want to make it easy for ourselves, like I said. So I'm going to polish it up, turn it over, do the other side, inspect it, take a look at it, and then I'm going to get rid of my mess in the background, and we have a piece that's ready to solder. You want to make sure there's no burrs or sharp points around the edges, and you can just use a simple acrylic nail file and go over those edges. And you also can shape the edges of your ring if you like. You can make it rounded, you can make it come to kind of like a V shape or like a rounded V shape. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just keeping mine with the squared edges. I'm going to use my rubber mallet on my steel bench block, and I'm going to hammer my metal piece just a little bit, and that's going to make it a little bit more firm. Once we're finished with that, now it's time to shape our ring onto our mandrel. And if you have a metal ring mandrel, that's great. I have my wooden one at hand, so I'm going to place the ring blank in the space of the size that I want. So I'm going for about a 6 or 7. I'm going to hold it there with my thumb and use my other fingers to wrap the ends of the strip of metal around the mandrel. And you can just slide it right off the mandrel when you're finished. If you're using a heavier gauge copper and the ends aren't laying flat, you can give it a bang or two with your mallet while it's on your mandrel. If you use the 28 gauge copper, it's going to be firmer, and if you use the 30 gauge copper, it's going to be more flexible, but we're going to solder it, and that's going to add some strength to it. By the way, if you're joining me for the first time, welcome. My name is Beth Love. I'm an expert in soft soldering, and I'm the author of the book Soldering Iron Jewelry. I'm also the author of the book Soldered Alchemy and the book Boho Chic Jewelry, which celebrated its, I think, 10-year anniversary last year. So let's get back to our project. Now I have my soldering iron heated up. I have my flux brush and my liquid flux. I have also already tinned my ring, and I'll get to that in a little bit and explain what I mean by that. But the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my stone for my ring. And you can pretty much solder anything as long as you can attach it with solder. And you don't want to do anything that's flammable like wood or plastic, but if you can wrap it in copper foil, you can pretty much put it on a ring. So I'm using some copper foil tape, and I'm wrapping it around my stone to measure it. And then I'm going to snip that off, and it's like a sticker. You're going to peel away that paper copper backing, and then I'm going to center it around the edges of my stone and press it down. So this is what we call foiling. It is basically an old stained glass technique. A lot of people call it the Tiffany technique, but that really is incorrect. This technique was invented and patented by Sanford Bray in 1886, and I have that in my book, Soldering Iron Jewelry. And he invented this to use in joining glass mosaic tiles. It was later widely used by Tiffany Studios. They popularized the technique, and they used it for, their stained glass lamps and windows, etc. Working my way around my stone, I'm going to use my fingers to press down the copper foil tape and adhere it to the stone. I want it adhered to that stone as firmly as I can get it. And after I'm finished using my fingers, I will grab my burnisher and I will go over the foil again. I'm going to make sure that I firmly press down all edges, and then I'll do the front and the parts that overlap the front and back edges, and it should be completely smooth. There shouldn't be any bumps or folds or wrinkles or anything like that in the foil. It should be nice and smooth, and that is our canvas for our soldering. And you have to prepare your canvas, right? So once I'm finished doing this, I have my soldering iron heated up. Like I said, I like to use liquid flux. You can use whatever type you like. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a length of copper wire. I use 20 gauge wire. Sometimes I use 21 gauge wire. You can use whatever type you like, really, whatever gauge you like. You want something that's going to be flexible. So you don't want a real heavy gauge like, 12 or 14 or something like that. And always remember, the lower the number, the heavier the wire, the higher the number, like 22, 24, that's thinner wire. I know it seems kind of weird, but I didn't invent it. So next I'm going to solder my stone. I'm picking up bits of solder with the tip of my hot soldering iron, and I'm just going to spread them around the copper foil tape, and make sure that you apply flux before you use the solder, because like I say, solder is not going to stick to your metal without flux. So you can see that I apply it a lot. It's going to evaporate, and you always definitely need to wear safety glasses and a respirator when you're soldering. And it doesn't matter what type of flux you are using, it all will produce fumes, as will the metal. I've heard someone say in a video once that they use, I think it was like a gel or paste flux, and they liked it because it didn't have fumes, didn't have smoke. That doesn't matter. You're still having fumes, even if you can't see them, they're there. So you definitely want to have a mask, a respirator that is made for fumes. You want to go to the hardware store and you want to find the right type. Aside from safety glasses and a respirator mask, you definitely should have a fume extractor when you're soldering. That is like a little vacuum that is going to suck the fumes right out of the air. You set it right on your workbench, and I'll have links to those below. The next thing I'm going to do is decide which is the top of my stone. Like, what do I want the top of my ring to be? So you'll see I'm going to flip this thing over and over again until I decide like exactly how I want it positioned onto my ring. And I mentioned earlier in the video that I had already tinned my ring, and what that means is I coated the copper ring that we made in the beginning of the video with flux and a nice coating of solder. I got the inside of the ring, the outside, all the edges, and I set that aside. So now that I have my stone all soldered, I'm going to add the wire to my stone. And then once I have all the wire part done, then we're going to put it all together. So I'm going to set the ring aside for now, and I'm going to add a little bit more flux as usual. I'm going to use my soldering pliers to hold the metal always. It's very hot. And I'm going to first coat my copper wire with a coating of flux and a coating of solder. You just pick up a bit of solder with the tip of your hot soldering iron, hold it against that copper wire, and when you first touch your soldering iron tip with the solder onto your metal, whether it's wire or copper foil or whatever, it's going to be cold in the beginning. Your metal's going to be cold, and within a few moments it's going to get really hot. So sometimes when you first touch your solder to the wire, it won't stick right away. It might roll off, and that's just why. It's just not warm enough. Just give it 2-3 seconds and that solder should stick very well. Now, if you have a solder that's not sticking at all, there's something wrong with what you're doing. Either your temperature isn't high enough, your flux isn't strong enough, or your wire is dirty or it is coated with something like a plastic, and that happens. So some people say, oh, well, nothing will stick. My solder won't stick to my copper. Well, something's wrong. Like you really have copper? Are you sure it's not coated with a coating, a plastic? Or, is it something you bought in a big box craft store, like a blank, for stamping or something that might not be for soldering? You have to make sure that it's raw copper, and you can just scrub it down with steel wool, take that coating off, and you should be good to go. I do show that in my one video. I think it's the headlining video when you first visit my page about doing the stamped solder discs, and I show in that video how I had to clean some of them down because they had a coating on them. Anyway, getting back to our wire, I am just going over it, making sure that I get the solder on every part of the wire. It's easier to do this than to put the wire onto the ring and then try to solder the wire as I'm like wrapping the wire around the ring. We don't want to do that. We want to have the whole wire coated with solder first, and it's just a smart way to do things. It's just the easy way to do it. So once that's finished, I'm going to decide on my stone where I want to start my wire. For this part, I actually grip my wire with my fingers because I have better control over it that way than holding it with pliers. And that's just until I get that first tiny little end attached to my stone. And of course you want to make sure that your wire's not hot. You don't want to touch anything that's going to burn you or hurt you. So just be careful. And once I have that little bit attached there, then I will use my pliers. I will use my fingers as well. And I'm going to slowly and carefully wrap the wire around my stone, and I am positioning and wrapping my wire towards the top of my stone, like towards the end of the copper foil, as opposed to it being down at the bottom part of the copper foil. It's like up toward the face, as you can see as I'm doing it in the video. And I'm going to work around, and I'm going to continue to bend the wire, and I'm going to continue to add more flux with my flux brush, and then I'm going to put little drops of solder to attach the wire to the stone. Also, on the side of my workbench where you can't see, I have a bowl I have some water in there, and if my project gets too hot, I can dip it in there, take a paper towel, dry it off, and then continue to work. And sometimes it just gets very hot from working on it. And if you're working with like a special stone, like a glass-like stone or a crystal or even a piece of glass, like you've seen that I do jewelry made from antique buttons, glass buttons, you've got to be very careful that you don't hold your soldering iron against your metal with that material in it for too long, or you definitely will crack your stone or your glass. So that heat can be a dangerous thing. You have to be careful and, use caution and make sure that you have something to quench it in nearby where you can cool it off for a moment. You can turn your iron off and unplug it and step away, take a break. Don't ever walk away from your soldering iron if it's plugged in. You always want to be very careful. And again, also you don't want to solder around children or pets. You have to be very careful with your chemicals and your tools and your materials. This part of my project is kind of time consuming. I did cut bits of it out where I didn't look like I was really doing anything. I was kind of sitting and thinking which way I'm going to go next and exactly how I want to position what. But when you see at the end of the video, you'll see how awesome this project is, and it looks a lot different than it does now, and I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. It's a pretty cool project. But in the meantime, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my next book. This is my fourth book. It's called The Broken China Jewelry Book. And if you know me and you're familiar with my artwork, my jewelry, I sell on Etsy under the name Dish Functional Designs. That is the name of my jewelry business where I create jewelry with antique china. I've been doing that for about 30 years. And I started as a stained glass artist and transitioned into mosaics and jewelry, and always soldering has been my number one thing. And like I say, I'm kind of a really good at it, and so I create books so other people can learn the techniques that I use and the things that I create and invent and projects I do. So I hope that you can check out my new book. Hopefully it'll be out within the next month or two. This is the Broken China Jewelry book, and I have 25 projects from start to finish of how you make jewelry with broken china. And there are soldering projects in there. There are projects that do not use solder. There are projects that use all different types of craft things that I kind of don't want to mention yet because I want it to be a surprise, but I think you're going to think it's really cool. At least I hope you're going to think it's really cool. So let's get back to our project. And I wiped it down. I cooled it off a little bit. You can see I have a paper towel where I can wipe some of the flux off. I don't want to get it too much all over my hands. It's not going to harm me. You don't want to, keep that on your fingers and like rub your eyes or anything. I find it hard to work with rubber gloves when I'm soldering. I do once in a while, and I do try to always wear them when I'm going to do a patina. But at this point, I'm checking out my ring, and I've wrapped that wire around a few times and soldering it down. And I'm trying to figure out how am I going to attach this, right? I need to attach the stone to the ring, and I'm going to use that wire. And we're going to go metal to metal, and then we're going to add solder. So I'm just kind of like craftily wrap it around the bottom of my ring slowly. While I'm wrapping that wire around, I will use small drops of solder to attach that wire to the ring base that we created in the beginning of the video, and that's how we're going to put it all together. And once I'm happy with it, that it's very secure, I'm going to add a lot of solder in there and really fill in any gaps, try to make it look, really nice and smooth. And I'm also going to go over the outside of my ring with extra solder to make it more firm so it's not too flexible. As I make this ring, some of the things that I am keeping in my mind are the weight of the ring. I don't want to make it so heavy so that it is uncomfortable to wear, or that it flops in a weird way when you wear it. You want to make sure that it has a nice balance to it. Once I have soldered the wires all to the base of the ring, and I have a nice coating of solder all around that ring base, I'm going to wipe it off. I dipped it into my water there and wiped it with a paper towel to remove some of the flux and to cool it down. And I'll use my fingers and my pliers. I'll use those to shape the little end of wire. You can either turn it into a curly Q, or you could, tuck it in somehow, and then we're going to solder that. Next, I will add a few drops of decorative solder. And my next book after my Broken China book is the Decorative Soldering book. I started working on it a few months ago. I have been decorative soldering for many years, and there's not much information out there on it. There's one book that's pretty good, but it's very outdated and out of print and way too expensive. So I'm doing something with all new information, and I think it's going to be pretty cool for people who are either doing soft soldering with jewelry or doing stained glass and soldering. If you're really new to soldering and you don't know where to start, or you want a complete course in soldering, that's what my last book, Soldering Iron Jewelry, is. It's a complete course in soldering. So now that I have my decorative soldering done, I'm going to wash and dry my ring. It needs to be completely clean and dry, and I'm going to add a patina. So I have a plate that I use only for adding a patina, and I have an old paintbrush that I only use for patina, and I have a couple paper towels on hand, and I'm going to pour a tiny little bit of patina onto my plate. Do not pour patina into the lid of your container, because once you're dipping in there, whether you're using a brush or a Q-tip or whatever, you're cross-contaminating your entire bottle of patina. So you either want to pour it into a small container, or you want to pour it onto a plate, and then you're going to clean it up with paper towels. You never want to rinse it down the drain. So I am going to use my brush and dip the tip of my brush into the patina, and you'll see how quickly it turns that metal black. It's like magic. I have my old rubber gloves on because it will make your fingers yucky, so you definitely want to wear gloves with this. And I'm just going to brush around it, and it's going to turn all the silver areas black. And if you're using old patina or you haven't cleaned your metal, your patina is not going to turn out right. It's not going to be a nice deep black. It's going to be maybe a rusty color, a muddy, or a gray color. So you want to have a nice dark, deep black color. And we will buff that then to bring out the silver beneath. And once I'm finished with it, I'm going to blot it with a paper towel. I'm going to set it aside to dry, and I'm going to let it completely dry for 5 to 10 minutes. And then I'm going to wash it off under running water using a soft bristled brush with a couple drops of dish detergent. And then I'll dry it. And while I was filming here, I had other rings that I was doing. I had projects from like my other books and stuff or new books I'm working on. And so I just wanted to do those right away as well. So here's a peek at another one that I did that has like a kind of a pointy spiked kind of edge. And I wanted to patina this one while I had the patina out, because you know, a little bit goes a long way. As you can see, I poured that little bit on my plate, and I have plenty more to use for other projects. But you know, you can't just reserve it and you can't pour it back into the bottle. And when you see that I dip the brush back in there, how it turns that patina like rust colored, that's like the metal, you know, that's coming off of what I'm applying it to. So I'm gonna wash up my projects, dry them off, and then the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna buff them with steel wool once again. And when we do that, we are removing the black patina in the raised areas, and the dark black patina will remain in the settled, recessed areas. And that gives it a really cool, like, vintage finish. And it's just a really nice effect. And while I'm buffing this with steel wool, I'm going to be very careful that I don't scratch my stone. I'm going to go over the edges a few times until I'm happy with the color, happy with the finish, and then I'm going to wash it off again. I'm going to rinse it, I'm going to dry it, polish it up with a soft cloth, and that's our ring. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. If you're not a subscriber, don't forget to subscribe and hit the little bell next to the subscribe button so you get notifications when I release a new video. Until then, I will see you next time with a great project, and be on the lookout for my brand new book, The Broken China Jewelry Book. Bye, guys.